It's called a 50-50 yard because the CDC was using it as a way to mix PCs with actives. What's cracking, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. New video. Today I want to talk about one of the weirdest, strangest scenarios I found myself in. Before I get to that, I want to explain something because, you know, I've seen recently where the term 50-50 yard has been used. And people say that a 50-50 yard is a PC yard, right? And so I want to break down what it really is or what it was, right? So the story I'm going to talk about is it takes place in Tehachapi, CCI Tehachapi, right? Now, for the Southerners, for the Northerners, for the whites, Tehachapi was a trash yard. Tehachapi was a 50-50 yard. And each group had their own time limit. So for the Southerners, you had 90 days to get off. I believe the Northerners, their time was quicker. I believe the whites, their time was around 90 days. But each one of those groups had their own time limit. They were the only groups that had a time limit, a curfew. We called it a curfew, right? Now, the reason why it's called a 50-50 yard, because I see people use the term, but they never break down why it's called a 50-50 yard. Think about that. If the CDC wanted you either to take you out or get you validated and you were active, they put you up for transfer to CCI Tehachapi. They knew that once you got there, you were going to get off. And if it was a righteous PC yard, the CDC, they can't send actives there. That's a lawsuit. But a 50-50 yard, they were covered. A lot of people were taken out, transferred there. A lot of people got taken out. Southerners got taken out specifically trying to move on a specific individual. And I'm not going to say that person's name, but those that know, you know what I'm talking about. So, getting back to my story, it's 1997. The CDC has decided that they're going to flip Tehachapi from a 50-50 yard to a full-blown GP yard. But they did it in a way where they could get their last hoorah. They could squeeze their last bit of evil out of their little endeavor in Tehachapi. So, I remember there was at least 6 of us, Southerners, on that bus. I don't believe there was any Northerners. There were some whites. There were blacks. We left Pelican Bay. We laid over in Delano. They housed us in Ad Seg in Delano, which is for an overnight layover. And one of the legends that the Southerners are under was there on his layover, going back to Pelican Bay. And he asked us, you know, what we're doing. We told him we're headed down to Tehachapi. And I remember him saying, nobody knows what you guys are headed into, but handle business. And we didn't know if the yard was going to be empty. We're going into an empty yard. If we didn't know what it was, nobody knew. How could we? Only the CDC knew. I told a story the other day about a guy that found himself in a really bad situation in the shoe. He went to the cops and he was on that bus with us. There was also another dude that we knew there were two dudes on the bus with us that had to go, that were Southerners or former Southerners. But going to Tehachapi, the type of people that were gonna be there, that had been there for years, those were trophies. You don't waste your time on the dudes that were on the bus with us. Those are for guys that they get to it when they get to it. But the guys that are going to be on that yard, if you're really trying to establish your name, your reputation, you're going to go after one of them. So we get to R&R, receiving and release. Our bus pulls in. And I remember the strangest thing happening. They opened up the compartments under the bus where our property was, but they opened up both sides. And on one side, they were taking all of our property off and lining it up, stacking it up next to the bus. And from the other side of the bus, they were loading property on. You never see that. They always unload the bus. Everybody gets off. You go in R&R. You do your strip. You get your clothing, all that stuff. You wait to be seen by the sergeant or whoever for your housing. Then you get housed. But again, on this one, people were tripping like, hey, what the fuck are they doing? They're unloading and packing the bus at the same time. So we go in R&R. And I remember they had a poster on the wall. And it was a poster and it had like 100 puppies. 100 dogs. And then the dead center was one cat. And it says something like, feeling a little out of place. The way Tehachapi had always been, that poster symbolized all the dogs were the dudes that were no good. And that cat was the actives. I haven't really heard of people talk about the experiment that the CDC did with CCI Tehachapi. Again, they killed a lot of people. The COs killed a lot of people that they sent down there knowing what was going to happen. There were dudes, there were convicts, actives that went down there and took someone's life on the yard. And then got validated. And then there were just dudes that got validated. But it was all a plan. It was all done by the CDC intentionally. Now, we get escorted off the bus into R&R. And everyone's pretty quiet. We're talking amongst each other, but our mind state is it's go time. And all of us that were on that bus, with the exception of one individual, all of us were around the same age. And I told this story before in another video. There was an older homie from Flores. This dude had a very, very well-established reputation and had done a lot of work. He started going to the pen in the 70s. And I had told him before we left Pelican Bay, I said, look, Holmes, because everybody knew who was going to Tehachapi. We had all talked prior to leaving. And I told him, look, Holmes, all these vatos, I don't know how serious they are. I said, but I'm trying to catch a body down there. He said, me too. I said, hey, how about we sell up? He said, all right. And so in R&R, we made sure to, when we got interviewed, that we'd say, hey, I want to sell up with homeboy. I gave him his last name. He gave them mine. So we're in R&R for a couple hours, whatever it was. They stripped us out, gave us our clothes, no property. And when it became time for us to go and get housed, we're getting escorted out of R&R, single file line. They take us to, we're on 4A yard, 4A. And they take us to 8 block. We go to 8 block, And no, excuse me. They took us to 7 block. 8 block was the hole back then. They took us to 7 block. I believe it was C section. It was the very first section when you walk in, next to the chow hall. That door opened to the section, and that's when I saw the weirdest thing I had ever seen. None of us, including the homie that had been down since the 70s, been doing it since the 70s, none of us had ever seen anything like this. There was a cop at the front door, at the section door. The door opened, and he would ask you, what's your name? You tell him your name, and he'll tell you what cell to go to. And he says, go straight to your cell. Don't look around. Dudes go in. And they're doing it like that, one by one. Of course, those of us that had already said we want to sell up with whoever, we're next to the dude that we're going to sell up with. And I remember when I got to the door, I looked into the day room. I was like, what the hell? I stepped into the day room. The entire day room, except the, not the cell portion, but in the day room, it was a bunch of inmates in their blues, their chest and their face pressed up against the wall, so we couldn't see who they were. We couldn't see their faces. We walked in. We went straight to our cells. Now, I know there's going to be some killers in the comments. And they're going to say, well, why didn't you just rush them right then and there? Why didn't you just get off then and there? With what? Our fists? On who? We don't know who they are. Only a sucker is going to rush just anybody and then be looked at real weird when you get to the back. They say, who you get off on, Holmes? Who the fuck is he? And they say, this vato ain't serious. So that's the reason why when we went in, we didn't just rush everybody with our fists. Not even, you're not going to smoke anybody with your fists. We walked in. We went straight to our cells. I remember I was in a cell upstairs. When the last one of us came in, the section door closed. And all of them dudes that had their faces pressed against the walls, some of them at one point were somebody. They turned around and they let all the bitch out of themselves. They started screaming at us, disrespecting us, spitting towards ourselves, disrespecting the legends. It was the weirdest thing I had ever seen. The fact that they pressed their faces against the wall to hide who they were, and then once we were secured in our cells, they turned around and they were the biggest killers ever. It reminds me of how YouTube is nowadays. It's the weirdest shit ever. Again, never saw it like that before. Never saw it like that again. And for those of you that didn't see the whole video, I never made it to 4A. See, they had dudes out there that the cops would let them know who came on the bus. Or we'd go to the chow hall. We're still in orientation. We go through the chow hall. And the kitchen workers would see who's on the bus or who just got off the bus, who's in fish roll. Dudes would talk about it. And the dudes that they felt were a threat, they tell the cops, don't let that dude out. The day I went to committee, my cellie and myself, we were the only two that got snatched up right there. He was first. He was the first one they called the committee, and they snatched him up, took him in the 8 block. We're like, damn. Especially me, I was like, fuck, okay. It is what it is. Other homies went back to their cells. My turn. And I remember they were saying, oh, we're going to put you up for graphic arts. We're going to put you up for this. We're going to put you up for that. And then the sergeant goes, get him against the wall. He just starts yelling, get him against the wall. I said, what the fuck? I was immediately handcuffed and sent to Ad Seg. Put me in the cell with the same homie that I was supposed to sell up on A-Yard with. That's my story for the day. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Everybody, please be safe, be smart, and tell the ones you love that you love them, man. I'm out of here.